I grew up learning that reliability earns you love. As the eldest of three sisters, I learned to be the helper before I learned to say no. The babysitter before I learned to drive the crisis manager, before I learned what I wanted for myself. Tessa in the middle was born to the spotlight. She could turn a room toward her, like a sunflower, follows the sun spreading charm like confetti bright, fleeting impossible to gather afterward. Rachel, the youngest, floated through our childhood cushioned by softness and excuses. If she forgot chores, it was because she was still little. If she missed curfew, we were reminded she was still learning. The messes they made seemed to evaporate. The ones I made became lessons. That pattern followed me into adulthood like a shadow. I built a life with Ethan, who wore steadiness like a second skin, and when I adopted Maya at 3 years old, the axis of my world shifted. She was heartbreakingly serious in those first months, watching rooms like a sentry, moving quietly, trusting slowly. The first time she slipped her small hand into mine without prompting, I cried in the grocery store parking lot, until my breath steadied and a promise surfaced. You will never feel like a guest in this family. I repeated it to myself on long nights of fevers and drawings taped crooked on the wall and whispered conversations about what makes a family real. She called me Mom one morning as if she were test-fitting the word. It fit me perfectly. I wanted my side of the family to wear that same promise. They tried in ways that felt safe to them, holiday cards that said to a sweet girl polite smiles, questions that grazed the surface and retreated. But the silence between those gestures hummed with something I didn't yet name. My mother introduced Maya as Claire's girl instead of our granddaughter, a sliver of distance disguised as precision. Tessa would say your daughter in a tone that made Maya sound like a temporary arrangement. When Maya offered to help in the kitchen, hands washed and eager, her words floated over the bustle without landing. She noticed. She always noticed. I told myself they didn't mean harm. Intent became my shield against the sting of impact. Then Tessa got engaged one spring, and fireworks of attention followed her everywhere she walked. Maya made a handmade card, careful cutout bells glued with excessive glitter that left our dining table sparkling for days. Tessa called it sweet and forgot it in the back seat of her car, crushed under a disposable cup. I fished it out and smoothed it flat while telling myself not to read meaning where there was only carelessness. The invitation arrived on heavy paper, with gold trim, like a door that announced itself with weight. I read the details at the counter while Maya worked at the table pencil tapping, half pretending not to watch me. The words, adults only 18, plus strictly enforced no exceptions, carved out a quiet space between us. I reread, hoping for an asterisk, a caveat, a line that said, "Of course nieces count." Maya saw my face before I spoke. "She doesn't want me there," she said, not as a tantrum, but as a weather report. I answered, "It's an 18-plus wedding," and watched a door close in her eyes. "Is it because I'm adopted?" she asked, setting her pencil down carefully, as if anything sudden might shatter something. That question cracked open years of tiny slights I'd filed under patience. I told her no, and I meant it, and still the question hung between us like a shard of glass. That night, I RSVP'd, not attending, with a click that didn't look like love, but was. The texts rolled in almost immediately. Tessa hoped I understood they were being super consistent, nothing personal, the phrasing of a policy memo dressed as affection. Rachel wanted to know what was going on this time. My mother took the long route, calling to talk about family unity, about how we'd all made sacrifices, about how hard it is to juggle. "Don't punish your sister," she said, as if I were grounding a child, as if Maya were not a child being grounded from belonging. I repeated the simplest truth: if Maya isn't welcome, I'm not going. That should have been the end, but when consistency protects exclusion, consistency becomes a weapon, and I felt the familiar weight of being told that peace would come if I swallowed my unease. Instead, I chose silence, and silence turned out to have teeth. Maya erased the dress photos from her phone and asked no more questions. I saw a frightening calm in her, the kind that grows in kids who stop expecting doors to open. I hated that calm more than I hated the rule. Then December crept in with its parade of traditions, and the group chat woke like a machine warming up. Who's bringing dessert to Claire's this year? Should we get there the night before, like usual? For years, I had hosted by muscle memory polishing what I didn't want to see. That year, I made one change so quiet, it barely made a sound. I didn't answer. I didn't scrub the house, pre-order a roast dig out the folding chairs, drag out the leaf to widen the table into accommodation. I did not announce a boycott. I simply let stillness do the talking. Say, continue to receive the next part. The silence irritated them like a tag in a shirt you can't pull off. The text shifted tone. Claire, are we still on for Christmas Eve? Tell me what to bring. Rachel wrote the logistics of a tradition assuming itself. Tessa followed with a sentence sharpened to a point. We'll be 5 again. Let me know if Maya wants anything specific this year. If she's even going to be there this time. The cruelty lived in its casualness. I felt heat rise and made myself breathe it into steam that dissipated in a quiet kitchen. Calls followed. I let them ring. My father's voicemail tried to cast my refusal as a temporary lapse from my better nature. It's not too late to do the right thing, he said, which suggested that inclusion of the people excluding my daughter was right by definition. Ethan asked if he should order folding chairs, a reflex question asked from love. No extra seats this time, I told him, and for the first time in years, our house felt sized to our lives. We made lasagna and our pajamas burned. The first tray laughed, let the second cool on the counter, while Maya rolled sugar cookies into imperfect stars that held their shape only because she coaxed them to. We watched movies, opened presents early, and every corner of our home exhaled. Absence can be noisy when you're used to filling it. That night, the quiet sounded like a choir. But silence refuses to let itself be dismissed. It demands interpretation. On December 26th, the group chat became a courtroom where I was tried in absentia. We've all tried to welcome Maya. Tessa wrote, rewriting history in the passive voice. If you cut off family every time there's a disagreement, you'll end up with no one, Rachel added, as if boundaries were an eraser rather than a frame. My father called my handling cruel. My mother sent a photo of their tree with the caption, "It wasn't the same without you." Maya would have loved her gifts, as if guilt wrapped carefully could pass for love. A few days later, a card arrived with my mother's handwriting, the familiar tilt of her letters making the words gentler than they were. She worried about the example I was setting, that Maya would learn from me how easily I shut people out. The phrasing tried to shame me, and yet it named the lesson I wanted to teach, that staying available to disrespect is not virtue, and closing a door can be an act of preservation, not spite. Maya watched me assemble these quiet refusals the way she watched everything hands, busy eyes absorbing. One evening, a blanket over her knees, sketchbook pressed against her legs, she asked a question as careful as a brushstroke. If I wasn't adopted, do you think they'd like me more? It stripped away all the justifications I'd used to cushion impact. I sat beside her and told the complicated truth. Simply, maybe they would pretend better, but real kindness doesn't depend on sameness. She looked older in that moment, not cynical, just resolved. I don't think I want them to like me anymore, she said, and something inside me that had been straining to reconcile snapped clean instead. A week later, the doorbell rang on a Thursday evening, cold air shouldering in when I opened the door. My parents stood with a container of oatmeal cookies, the kind my mother made when apologies were too expensive for her pride. We thought we'd stop by, she said, her voice doing that breathy thing that used to pull me back into compliance. Can we come in just for a minute? My body remembered every time I'd said yes at the cost of myself. No, I said, and the words surprised me by being steady. They tried a new angle, talk of patience, of teenage storms of space given, and now needed back. Then my mother said the quiet part out loud, gently, like she was offering me relief. She's not blood. She's not really one of us. She meant it to sound reasonable, like gravity named, instead of cruelty committed. Something rose in my throat that tasted like old copper. I stepped back. "You need to leave," I said, and when my father murmured my name the way people use a key, I closed the door, turned the lock, and leaned against it until the house was ours again. The next morning, I told Maya because I have never lied to her about the things that matter. I watched her hands clench in her lap without trembling, watched resolve slide into place like a final puzzle piece. "They really think I'll leave you," she said. "They hope you will," I said, acknowledging the kind of hope that tries to pry daughters from mothers to prove a point about blood. We thought the porch scene would be the coda, but a week later, my cousin forwarded me an email Rachel had sent to the extended family. It was a braided rope of insinuation I had abandoned everyone for a girl who manipulated her way into my life. Our bond was unhealthy, my protections obsessive. It was crafted with enough plausible deniability to survive casual scrutiny and vile enough to aim straight at the softest parts. The fallout arrived on little digital feet. Aunts and uncles reached out to check if I was okay, as if concern could be weaponized into correction. A second cousin commented under one of Maya's art posts, "You're very lucky. Don't forget who gave you a home," the kind of sentence that looks like gratitude until you hold it up to the light and see control shining through. I felt the old urge to explain wake up inside me, and then felt it fall back to sleep. Instead, I did something I should have done sooner. I gathered every receipt I had, the forgotten card under the cup, the Claire's girl, the holiday place cards without her name, the mass texts without her presence, the 18+ exclusion dressed as policy, the invitations that never came, the photos where she stood at the edge because no one closed the gap. I assembled them without commentary like exhibits in a case file. Then I wrote a letter as dry as bone and sent it to the extended family with a subject line that made no demands for those who wanted the full story. Responses trickled in and sorted themselves into piles, some supportive, some silent, some offended that I had dared to trouble the water of denial. I blocked the ones who insisted that if I'd just talked it through properly, harmony could be restored. Harmony built on swallowing a child feels like a hymn until you notice who's gone hoarse. Type, continue to receive the next part. January arrived like a clean page I did not plan to fill on their behalf. The group chat fell quiet without my energy to feed it. The house kept the scent of lasagna longer than seemed possible, like a reminder that simple meals eaten in peace can taste like freedom. One night, Ethan poured tea and asked if I missed them. I told him I missed the idea of them, the kinder story I wanted to tell about who we were, the one where differences were invitations, not verdicts. The real story felt smaller and truer. Boundaries built our rooms. In that quieter space, life did not turn miraculous. It turned honest. Maya got braver with her art, not louder, but more herself. She started showing me sketchbook pages without bracing. She applied to programs that would let her chase the way light falls on faces at different hours, the way color holds feeling, the way blank paper forgives. In spring, she pinned acceptance letters to a corkboard and looked at them like maps out of a childhood she had learned to survive. We bought a second-hand lamp for her desk and laughed about dorm laundry. In May, her high school held a senior showcase, and Maya hung 3 pieces that looked like windows. People stood in front of them for a long time, quiet, in a way that felt like respect rather than judgment. Rachel did not come. Tessa did not come. My parents did not come. The empty chairs didn't hurt the way they used to because the room was overflowing with people who saw her first. Boundaries once set kept proving themselves in small daily mercies. The tightness in my chest I had learned to ignore unwound. I slept without rehearsing conversations I would never get to have. When the phone rang with an unknown number, I let it go to voicemail without inventing emergencies. I made lists that had nothing to do with preparing a home for other people to perform in. I thought more about what our own holidays could look like than about what story my family was telling about me while they passed potatoes. Sometimes I caught myself inventing their lines anyway, writing a defense in my head against accusations that had become predictable as seasons. I let the imaginary trial end without my testimony. It is a skill to stop arguing your worth to people invested in not seeing it. The next test arrived dressed as celebration. Graduation weekend descended with programs and mortarboards and the impossible bustle of logistics no one controls. I braced without meaning to. I half expected someone to appear at the edge of the bleachers, a contrite expression serving as a ticket back into our lives. No one came. After the ceremony, the parking lot swirled with caps tossed and photos posed and proud voices rising. A woman I didn't know told Maya that her portfolio made her cry. Maya said thank you in a voice I recognized from our kitchen, steady, soft, earned. We ate tacos standing up and let salsa drip onto paper plates and joked about the grand hilarity of rental gowns. That night, we sat on the floor and looked at the future not as a cliff, but as a path. When I leave, Maya said, "You know, I'm not leaving." We had been saying that to each other for years in different words. Saying it that night closed a circle. I felt a grief I could name and bear, not the grief of being withheld from, but the grief of watching a beloved person step into a life I helped make possible. Love is sometimes refusing to let an unkindness define a bond. Sometimes it's refusing to let your old pain script someone else's possibilities. On move-in day in August, we carried boxes up 3 flights of stairs that made my thighs revolt. Ethan fixed a wobbly shelf with a coin he insisted was as good as a screwdriver. We hung a postcard above Maya's desk that said, "Make honest work." I wrote the campus mailbox number on the inside cover of a book I knew she would lend to someone and not get back. We hugged in a hallway filled with other families doing the same primal choreography, and she whispered into my neck, "I'm not going anywhere." After we drove away, I turned and saw her small shape in the rear view, the way she held herself steady, soft earned. The drive home stretched with a familiar quiet. "Are you okay?" Ethan asked, and I surprised both of us by saying yes. The yes didn't mean the past had rewritten itself. It meant the present had my full attention. That night, my phone buzzed with a text from my father's number. No message, just a photo of a sunset captioned, "Thinking of you." I let it sit unanswered and did not feel cruel. I felt consistent. A sunset is beautiful without being a bridge. Fall folded toward winter and our new traditions took root. We mailed Maya a paper snowflake she'd made at 7 that we found under a stack of recipe cards, and she taped it to the cinder block wall of her dorm. We planned our own small December without asking permission. I did not host, not because I was sulking, but because my house is not a stage. People I love who love us came anyway, slowly, carefully, with pies and laughter, and stories where Maya's name appeared like any other family member's without asterisks. We went to bed early and woke to a kitchen that looked used rather than performed. In that season, I understood something I wished I could hand to my younger self, like a lantern. You can build a family from the inside out, not the outside in, and the shape it takes will be exactly large enough to hold the people who choose it. Type. Continue to receive the next part. Time carries its own arguments for and against forgiveness. There were days when a sudden smell of oatmeal cookies, even in a store aisle, nowhere near my mother's kitchen, pulled me back into the doorway where she said, "Not blood," like she was returning a library book. On those days, I breathed through it and reminded myself that the story we are writing now has a different narrator. There were moments when I wanted to call and say, "Do you want to try again?" And then remembered I had already tried every version I knew how to try. I folded the urge into a drawer with the other things I don't wear anymore. Peace is not installed, it is practiced. I chose to practice it. Maya's first semester ended with calls at odd hours, photos of sketches taped to studio walls, messages about learning to manage time, and loneliness and joy. She still called most nights not because she needed permission for her life, but because sharing is what we do. Once late, she said she had been thinking about that question she asked on the couch months earlier. If I wasn't adopted, would they like me more? She told me she'd realized she didn't care about the answer anymore, not out of bitterness, but because it had stopped being a measure. I used to think I wanted to be unavoidable, she said, but now I think I want to be chosen. I told her that is what we had been practicing all along, choosing each other on purpose, re-choosing without waiting for permission, slips stamped by people who benefit from our confusion. The extended family quieted eventually. Stories replace facts in groups where image is currency, and I am sure I am a cautionary tale told in living rooms that smell like polish and roast. I can imagine the script how obsession masqueraded as love, how boundaries became proof of instability, how a mother made herself alone. I hope they tell it that way. It leaves me in the clear role I prefer the woman who refused to barter her daughter's dignity for a seat at a table that would not make room for her. People ask sometimes when they learn pieces of the story in ways that feel less like gossip and more like empathy, whether I plan to reconcile. The truth is that the word reconciliation suggests a returning to what once was, and what once was cannot sustain who we are. I can forgive a person and still decline their template. I can wish someone well and still wish them elsewhere. Forgiveness for me looks like not telling the story again in my head when I'm trying to fall asleep. It sounds like laughter in a kitchen that smells like cinnamon and paint. It feels like relief in my shoulders when a December passes without a single chore done to earn love that should have been free. If you followed me this far, you might be waiting for a big moment, a hinge on which everything swings, the apology letter, the dramatic confrontation at a graduation, the sudden awakening of people who realize they have lost something they cannot replace. Those moments belong to movies and sometimes to life, but not to ours. What we had instead was a series of small certainties strung together like lights, the RSVP that said, not attending the unhosted Christmas that made room for joy, the closed door that stayed closed, the letter sent without venom and without begging, the block button pressed without guilt, the tacos eaten, standing up after a ceremony that crowned a girl whose face I once memorized in case she needed me to survive me. I return to one scene when I doubt myself, my mother on the porch offering cookies as a currency to buy back control, and me understanding that kindness without respect is a sweet poison. It took me decades to learn that love without conditions is not the same as relationships without boundaries. It took me longer to see that my eldest daughter training to keep the peace by absorbing the blow was not noble, only familiar. Here is the lesson I promised myself to hold and hand down. You are allowed to redesign your family's map so your child does not grow up thinking that love is a door they must knock softly on. You are allowed to be the first one in the story who says, no more, and then lives through the echo without filling it with apology. If you are reading this and recognizing your own dented traditions, I hope you hear this clearly. Consistency that protects exclusion is not virtue. Patience that excuses harm is not maturity. And silence used wisely is not indifference, but the refusal to rehearse old scripts. The most powerful change I made looked like nothing from the outside. I simply did not set extra places at a table for people who would not set a place for my daughter. That quiet turned out to be loud enough to change the direction of our lives. If this story moved you, take a second to like, share, and subscribe so more people can find it. I'd love to hear your thoughts. Drop a comment about a boundary you set that gave your family back to you.